Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to the 47th Right and Left Discussion Forum. The purpose of our discussion forum is to demonstrate that it is possible to have civil discussions about contentious topics that result in expanding everyone's knowledge and understanding through thoughtful consideration of diverse opinions. Today's topic is a national discussion on race relations. Specifically, who should be talking to whom about what? And I'm going to go back and repeat that topic again because I screwed it up a little bit. The topic is a national discussion on race relations and how should we do it mainly. Our panel today, beginning on my left, is Jerry Ritzman, chairman of the board of Ritzman Natural Health Pharmacies. On his left is Dr. Natalie Sydorenko, educator and writer in the field of communications, and on her left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. On his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and current member of the Wadsworth City Council. Jerry, as you know, whenever there's been a high-profile racial event, there's typically a call for a national discussion on race, particularly race relations. To my knowledge, the only time such a discussion was attempted was in 1997, when President Clinton staged a series of town hall meetings. If such a discussion were held this year, who do you think should be invited to participate, and what should they talk about?
That's a very good question, John, and I've thought about that quite a bit. And I think that who should be involved in the discussion should be needs to go gradually as getting into a cold pool, this discussion on race relations. We would need to start with individuals who are not at the extreme points of view on race relations. We would have to have people who have different points of view, but they aren't that far apart. And we would have to have them talk about a particular topic, not try and solve the whole race relations situation. I want them to talk about a particular topic that may not be one of the most contentious ones, but we need to, I think, we would need to ease into it with people who are not on the poles of race relations in their opinions, who are close together, and then not on a topic that is very contentious, but one that has some common ground, but there are differences of opinion. Then as we work through that and would be able to think and consider the other individual's point of view, that we could then start to get somebody or get individuals in the discussion who may be a little bit wider apart on their positions or their opinions, and then that we would also then be able to widen get the topic that might be a little bit more contentious. But I think we need to ease into it, because if we start from the polls, either with the topic or the individual, we're going to end up with a fight, and then it stops. Nobody listens then. That's where I think it needs to start, and in general, the type of people who need to be in it. I think the people who would need to be in it would also need to be individuals who have a pretty high level of self-confidence, that they would be able to look at themselves and say, you know, I was wrong on that. Your opinion has swayed me over. Not somebody who is fighting just to win the argument. That's my thought.
Sometime before we're done here, I hope that we can come up with some suggestions on what a non-threatening topic could be. Maybe you can think about that eventually, Natalie, but what do you think now?
Well, I've thought about this question since you asked it to us, and admittedly, I feel uncomfortable that we're a panel of 5 white people even discussing who should be allowed to talk about race. The first reason that makes me uneasy is because we are not marked by race. We all walk around every day in a world that was crafted in the United States of America under a whitewashed setting. We are the norm. Things are catered to us. Frantz Fanon, wonderful author, wrote years ago a book called Black Skin, White Masks, about how as a person with darker skin, your whole life is to strive to be passed off as white, to earn the things that white people have naturally, so that your race is not marking you. We are not marked in society as people with darker skin are marked. That being said, I have had colleagues with dark skin say white people should not even be allowed to be talking right now after Ferguson. We don't want to hear your voices. We don't want to have your empathy. We don't want you to pray for peace. Please just shut up. And I felt crushed by that because I felt like, where can I go with that? How can I tell my children to engage these important topics about race if I'm not allowed to speak? So I don't believe any voices should be silenced, but my main concern would be when we gather people together to discuss race, who are those people going to be? Are they going to already be people who are seasoned intellectuals? Are they going to be people with political appointments or high standing in their communities? I believe at some point we need a racial discussion where we get the 16-year-old young black man from downtown Cleveland in the discussion to say, what does it feel like phenomenologically to be in your skin every day? And then have the young white 16-year-old woman say, this might be why I'm afraid to walk down the street when you're there. Stereotypes or not, right? So that we can start having an open discussion of how to change these views and actions, not necessarily in our generation, but in the younger generations, because without action in the younger generations and increased nuanced understanding of race relations, we are not going to change the future, and we're going to keep repeating the same mistakes we've seen for decades.
Mm-hmm. Bryan, you're looking very thoughtful.
Yeah, as a middle-aged white man, I'm not sure I'm qualified to even talk about this, but I'll give it a shot. I think we need to sort of ratchet down some of the rhetoric that surrounds this issue. Maybe it was a benefit or maybe it wasn't, but my father was in the military, and at the time the military, they were in the process of basically desegregating it, and I went to elementary school with blacks, whites, Asians, Filipinos, mixed marriages, German women marrying Hispanic men, black men, and I think what I learned was that it wasn't the color of the person's skin, but it was the rank on his sleeve that you respected because he earned that rank. And whether it was, a Latino lieutenant or a black sergeant, that individual earned that rank, and he was given that respect because of that rank, and it didn't make any difference what color he was or where he came from. And I think we've drifted to a point in our society where, unfortunately, things like this happen where we can't talk about things. We're afraid to talk about things because we're considered, basically, out of the picture. We can't bring those ideas to the forefront. So it is a difficult thing, and I think we need to back away from the just the overall rhetoric and sometimes we go so far to accommodate things. We have to step back and say, well, wait a second, where do we go from here? There has to be a solution of some sort. We can't continue doing what we're doing, and we have to have some sort of a starting point. I think there was a lot of hope when our president was elected that race relations would be better. I don't know if that's true or not.
Right, I agree. I feel that the divide has almost gotten wider since he's been elected than prior to.
And Wadsworth is a pretty white community. I get a kick out of seeing some of the kids dress up as sort of like gangbangers or whatever. They're about as white as Wonder Bread. So I don't know. I don't know where you start. I wish I had something a little more deeper to say, but we have to start somewhere, and maybe it's just a basic understanding and then moving forward from there. Mm-hmm.
Well, Patty, what do you think?
You addressed a national discussion about race, and this has been tried before. One of the concerns I have with the national discussion is and too many times when this type of event occurs, we get the people that are involved are those that have an agenda, those that want to make a name for themselves, and they're in it for the fame and the attention. I can think of one in particular that has done that recently, just to put their name out in the forefront, and I'm not sure that they help the situation. Also, you have to look at race, I think, on a local level as opposed to a national level. The way something plays in New York City is not the way that it plays or sounds in small town Mississippi. They have different issues. We have, for that reason, I'm not sure that we would have a national discussion, but rather I would think it would be more a local discussion amongst in-states, having that 16-year-old from Cleveland be involved, have that rural farm worker from Mississippi be involved, the people that are there in the clenches, but also then to deal with the situations that are unique to that particular area. I know in the past we have tried to legislate racial relations, and with good reason. I mean, the Civil Rights Act, all of the things that we have done. The problem is you can't legislate opinions, and racism is based upon opinions, not the law. The law may say that you do not discriminate, but that doesn't keep you from in here from discriminating against someone of another race. And I think by having the local discussions on topics that you can start to possibly change those opinions. It's one thing to be involved in that discussion. It's another to just hear somebody else in Washington discuss it that you have no connection with. One thing you talked about topics to start with, although this would involve some legislation, but would be voting rights. I mean, this has been a very topical issue the last few years, and there have been changes proposed in voting laws in some states that the blacks have said that this will disenfranchise them. The rest of the population is saying, no, this is to prevent voter fraud. Maybe this is an issue they need to talk about. Maybe there's a happy medium. Okay, maybe we do want to address fraud, but we also want to make sure that it is easy for people to vote. And have that type of conversation, not in the state legislature, but amongst your individual communities to see if they can come up with a practical solution that will work in the best interest of all those stakeholders.
Natalie, your friend that said that white people should just shut up, is this somebody that you think cares about reconciliation?
Yes, that was the hardest thing for me after Ferguson. One of my mentors, who actually was a professor who sat on my dissertation committee, was the person who posted on a Facebook post, I just want all white people to not speak. You cannot speak right now. We don't want to hear you call out for peace. You have no understanding of our rage. You have no understanding of our rage. And I just was filled with such sadness. And several of my other colleagues who I went to school with and teach in other places now were agreeing with him. I was very nervous, but I tried to muster up the courage, and I asked him directly, I don't want to name him, but I asked him directly, please understand, we do want peace. We don't want these young black men dying, and we don't want police officers dying. We don't want any of this happening. Why can we not speak? What can we do if we can't speak? And of course his answer was, you're the last person I intended this comment for, and of course, but my larger concern was, if we try to stifle dialogue, even though I completely respect that I can't possibly know what it's like to be going through this in America with darker skin, if we stifle the dialogue, how can we teach the new generation to talk about it in terms that are meaningful? And like you pointed out, that aren't filled with empty rhetoric that just is bombastic and keeps perpetuating the problem and the division. And like Patty pointed out, we don't want that to be talking heads in Washington. you know, we don't need Al Sharpton and Rush Limbaugh to be
That's-
going against each
Well, I was
other,
thinking
representing
of.
their sides when they really don't represent any of us.
Exactly.
So I,
Well, unfortunately, they do represent some of us.
they do.
Yes, and
I would say to a very small extent, John.
I would hope so.
They're in a privileged position. They have talking points that are rehearsed. They like to stir up the contentious nature of the debate.
They like to hear themselves talk and see their picture on TV.
Yeah.
Correct.
So,
Correct. And I think some of the responses that I generated by asking my friend this question, and he's teaching over in Asia now, and he's from India, so he has multi-layered, he desperately wants reconciliation. But I think he's at the point where...
But he wants us white people to shut up?
Yes, because I think he feels, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but some of the perspectives that were being posted in our discussion were, at this point, any rage that people of darker skin color are feeling is A, warranted, and B, there needs to be some kind of revolution in their thinking, a revolution in the way the world has been governed and run by whites really overpowering darker colors in the world. And I think they just don't know where to go with that, so they are angry and think that we have nothing to contribute to the dialogue. I hope we do have something to contribute to the dialogue.
Well, I'm going to contribute this to the dialogue. When I think about going back to the Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman case, through Michael Brown, through Eric Gardner, and others, there's not one shred of evidence that race had anything to do with any of those events, only in people's minds. Zimmerman was accused of profiling because, excuse me, because Trayvon Martin was wearing a hoodie. You don't know what George Zimmerman was thinking. There was no indication that he had any racial intent. And I think that as of yesterday, even the Justice Department decided there was no civil rights violation in Ferguson. That was not a racial incident. It was only made to be one by people who are very angry.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Well,
Yeah.
tell me what the evidence was in any one of those cases that it was racially motivated.
well, Zimmerman called the police and followed him
Right.
because he was black and he had a hoodie and he was in the neighborhood.
Excuse me. He didn't follow. Was there evidence that he followed him because he was black?
Why did he follow him?
Because there had been break-ins in the neighborhood. He was a volunteer guard, neighborhood watch person, and there was somebody in the neighborhood that looked suspicious to him, so he called the
And
police.
he looked suspicious because he was walking.
You don't know that. Well, he was walking.
He was walking in the neighborhood, and he called the police. I mean, I get a little. He called the police, and they said, "Stay where you are. We will handle it." And he followed him. Wasn't he just?
He followed him before he was told.
Didn't I just hear in the news Zimmerman was in trouble with the law again?
Yeah, he was,
Yes.
but that's got
Yeah.
nothing to do
I
with
was
what
just
happened
curious,
with
yeah.
Trayvon Martin.
Yeah.
But I still have not heard anything to indicate that there was any racial intent on the part of George Zimmerman.
But John, I feel like all evidence is not concrete quantitative evidence. I mean, I doubt that you're going to find someone who, if they are afraid of darker skinned people or if they have something against African Americans or against Hispanics or whatnot, I don't think you could ever interview a police officer or a bystander for that matter and have them say, hey,
yeah.
is your violence against this person racially motivated?
No, said, sure.
They're
yeah.
not going to admit that. I think that we
But
can
then why do you
understand
think,
as a community.
why are you so sure that it was? Because of what? You've got a belief system that is not necessarily
Because I think
based on-
racism is alive and well in America, and there, I've said it.
Okay, that's it.
I think racism is alive and well. I think
Okay,
that young
let's-
black men are targeted.
Okay, before we get too far
Yes.
afield on that, the question about who should be taking part in any kind of a discussion on race. I think that the thing that stands in the way of racial reconciliation is part politics. People on the left feel differently than people on the right. And I think that people on the left and people on the right, like us, have every right in the world. In fact, we have a responsibility to talk about it. Excuse me. Anytime there is an event, like all the ones that we've seen, the people on the left all come out and say racism. The people on the right say no. Don't we have the obligation to sit here and talk with each other first?
Oh, agreed.
Agreed.
But yeah, one of the issues is the moderate voice has now been cast as an extreme voice. Because over the years I've read Thomas Sowell, I've read a variety of conservative thinkers, I've read, you know, and listened to what people would consider very liberal thinkers. But those people that are willing to bring it to the middle, that message doesn't play anymore. You know, you cannot represent the black individual unless, from my perspective, you have some sort of extreme view. The solutions don't, the solutions that the moderate voice provides is not what people want to hear. And that, I think, keeps people from coming in and working on solutions, because we're dealing from two very, very separate and, you know.
You first have to admit there is a problem still. I mean, there are people that believe there is no racism,
Right.
that will not accept that fact. And I mean, there's, you know, I was just reading 2 days ago that it is equal opportunity for a white male with a criminal record to get a job. That person is as likely to get a job as a black male without a criminal record. Which,
All other things being equal?
Yes.
all
Same
other things
experience,
being
education?
equal.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
That the fact that the white male is often chosen over the black male, even to the point where the white male has a criminal record.
Absolutely.
And I don't know that it's done intentionally. I really don't know that. I can't say that someone looks at them and said, oh, I've got to hire this guy because he's the white.
But that's why racism is systemic, and exactly what you said earlier, Patty. We might not believe that we're racist, but when you grow up with structures in place that teach you to notice the difference in these types of ways, this is why the difference is meaningful.
Have you seen the Larry
It
Wilmot
happens.
show yet? He's on at night. He replaced
Yes,
Stephen
I did
Colbert.
see it.
And he has a panel, and he has this truth thing he does at the end. You have to be 100% true. And he asks questions, and he has quite a few black Americans on. And one of the questions was to one of the female members, and he asked, if you're walking down the street and there is a black male on one side and a white male on the other side, which side do you walk down?
Frantz Fanon has that in the book I mentioned, Black Skin, White Mask.
What's
Yeah.
the race of the person who's making this decision?
I don't remember. I think they ask.
The black woman will go toward the white guy too.
Yeah, I think it was a white woman. Her answer, of course, she would go on the side with the one that looks better. But so she did not really answer the question. But if you stop and think about that, you may not think you're racist, but there are some ingrained ideas that we have that.
And I
make
think
it
Bryan brought up an excellent point about that ties into our last discussion. The moderate voice isn't heard because it's not given a spotlight to be heard either.
Right.
The media doesn't promote that.
Right.
The media wants that clash. That drives our fear. That keeps us separated.
That-
And
That's
the
what news
entertainment
is.
value. Yes.
Right.
News is the happenings that aren't every day, and so they have to highlight that.
And I think what's disappointing at times is there's always, in my own terms, the man. And the man is authority. The man is the policeman, whether he's black, white, Hispanic. You don't hear about the black policeman that shoots the unarmed Mexican, the Latino boy, whatever we're, coming out of the store. We don't hear that story. And we have to get past this notion that somehow the man is out to get us and to keep us down. And have these discussions, because if you're not going to talk about it, I think we're just
then
chasing
again,
our tail here.
We would circle back to the original question. If we were to have a national discussion, if we were able to somehow, by some miracle, put together a combination of people, black, white, left, right, I would like to think bright people, thoughtful people committed to civil discourse, if you could put them all together and had a perfect discussion, what would the outcome be? I mean, why would we, you know, there is a national discussion going on right now, and it's been going on all my life. Race is being discussed nationwide in groups like this, around the water cooler, at the Christmas parties, and I mean, there is a national discussion going on.
If our expectations were for that discussion to have everybody come out of it and agree with each other, I think we would be sorely disappointed. I think that we would have to go into that thinking, you know, we're going to get enlightened and maybe change our opinions somewhat, but not everybody's going to come out here in lockstep.
No, I agree with you,
and
Jerry. I think
and realize that that's okay.
that's an idea. Yeah, that it is okay, and hopefully that we would raise, to quote Martin Luther King Jr., the content of our character, but also that we would raise our humanity. That even though we know we're not going to fix it, and there's still going to be tragedy, that our compassion and our humanity would grow. For both people, I had a student in particular who was raised in a very racist household, and she would make comments in class, and my African American students would look at me like they wanted to pounce on her. And I said one day, I want you to have as much compassion for her, and that this is how she was raised, and this is how her thinking is, and teach her to think differently as I want her to have for you. I want people to embrace people more about, we're not inherently bad people. We are raised differently to think differently, and if we can understand more about each other, then maybe our humanity will come through more.
I wish we had more time. We've got about 15 seconds now to discuss this topic, and I don't think that we can really get rolling on anything, but it used to be easier to decide what was racism. I know my first experience when I went in the Army, got off the bus in Louisville, Kentucky, getting ready to go to Fort Knox, and I was encountered by a white dining room and a black dining room and so forth. First time I ever saw it. Now that was easy to discern, but not now. We have institutional racism, which is something. Well, thank you. We're going to have to come up on this subject again in some regard. I don't know. We'll have to do it. Anyway, I'd like to finish with this quote. The hidden question is, do we adopt beliefs because we find truth in them, or for other reasons that have nothing to do with the need for truth? We can answer that next time. Thank you.